Good. It's still evening, not morning. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Labor and Commerce Sub 3. I believe we've effectively cut our docket this evening about in half with some of the announcements I'm about to make. So hopefully we'll not be here all night. I'm going to be asking people to move quickly this evening. I don't need to tell everybody what time it is. I don't want to stifle conversation, but I'll just apologize to everyone in advance now. I am going to be pushing people. We've got 3 minutes on the clock. I'm going to use that as a sort of suggestion for now. But as the evening wears on, that it might become more of a rule. So we can all help one another out by being as quick as we possibly can. A couple bills that we are going to take by for the day. HB 1576, HB 528. Now, there are several that we're going to take by for the day, but we are going to hear testimony so that we won't be voting on them this evening, but there's some people who have come distances and some people who want to talk to the committee, but we will put the votes off until our next meeting. That's HB 969, HB 1132, HB 1483, and HB 110. So if I could have a motion.
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Those bills are by for the day, subject to hearing testimony on those that I identified. We also will be incorporating a couple bills into one another. We will be incorporating HB 206, which I note is not actually on tonight's docket, but is on the subcommittee's docket, into HB 1677. That's a voice vote too, isn't it? Yes. I need a motion on that.
So moved, sir.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Without objection. And we'll be incorporating 1607 into 1664. Second? Any second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Without objection, those bills are incorporated.
Mr. Chair,
Delegate Keane.
do you happen to have, I'm sorry I didn't touch base with you on this, do you happen to have House Bill 912 being incorporated into House Bill 572 by any chance?
We do now. Which
Yeah,
one?
I'm sorry that I didn't tell you about this. Delegate Simon's House Bill 912, which is a very, very fine bill, because he's at a subcommittee meeting right now, he asked that if he could incorporate that into House Bill 572, which is not as fine of a bill, then we could take up House Bill 572 tonight.
Okay, so HB 912 into HB 572. Is there a motion? All in favor? Opposed? Without objection, that incorporation. Delegate Lopez.
So, Mr. Chairman, I was in the impression that HB 1152 was going to be rolled into the governor's bill on regional greenhouse gas initiatives.
1152. Delegate Lopez, as usual, is right. So HB 1152 is going into HB 981.
Yes.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Without objection. All right. First on the docket is Leader Herring with HB 981.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. There is a substitute.
While it's being passed out, is there a motion? All in favor? Any opposed? The substitute's before us.
All right, thank
Do
you.
you want
Ms.
to tell us what the substitute's about, Madam Leader?
All right, this bill is about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and will allow Virginia to use funds generated through the sale of carbon pollution credits on RGGI market to provide energy efficiency for low-income communities and resilience to climate-driven flood across the state. I'll take you quickly through the bill. Of course, there's a definitional section. I would like to just first jump to lines 110 and 127. The bill will direct an estimated $1 million annually to improving energy efficiency, lowering energy bills for low-income Virginians by 50% of the money generated, preparing coastal and inland communities, increase flood hazards associated with climate change, using 45% of the funds generated, and only 5% of the funds generated would go to administrative costs. Without this legislation, revenue generated through the sale of carbon pollution credits will go back to the owners of the fossil fuel fire power plants that are creating the pollution in the first place, and Virginia will lose the opportunity to use the RGGI funds to help address climate change as the program intends. Lines 42 through 55 address the Shoreline Resiliency Fund created by the General Assembly in 2016. It will now be called as the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. It will authorize the Department of Conservation and Recreation to authorize grants and loans for the fund for the purposes of flood hazard mitigation and planning. With the housing component, 50% of the Department of Housing Community Development money will go there for low-income energy efficiency programs, 45% for resilience investments, 3% to DEQ administrative fees to run RGGI auction program, and 2% for DHCD to administer the low-income energy efficiency program. And Mr. Chair, I'll stop there because I know that there are probably questions and
Thank you,
And I
Delegate.
only had-
Thank you, Delegate.
thank you.
I think we already did that. We did. Any questions for the patron from the panel? Hearing none, are there any people in the audience interested in speaking in support of the bill? We'll put 3 minutes on the clock. Mr. Secretary, good evening.
Chairman Sullivan, members of the committee, Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources for Governor Northam. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and certainly appreciate Leader Herring patroning the bill. On behalf of Governor Northam, I'd like to offer my support. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative has proven the power of the market can drive down pollution and lower electricity costs while generating revenue to improve our economy and our environment, in this case through low-income energy efficiency programs and resilience to inland and coastal flooding. We've got a number of folks here from the administration who can answer questions if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with Sierra Club, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. Thank you, Leader Herring. My name is Ann Phillips. I'm the Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection, and so am implementing the Governor's strategies with Executive Order 24, 29, and 45. We are particularly interested in supporting this bill, House Bill 981.
Madam, can I ask you to suspend for just 1 second?
Certainly.
We can barely hear you. This microphone's been acting up all day, so
Okay.
unfortunately,
Thank
sort
you,
of
sir.
lean in if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right.
I'll state my name again just in case it is not recorded. My name is Ann Phillips. I am the Special Assistant to Governor Northam for Coastal Adaptation and Protection, and in that context am charged with implementing his Executive Order 24, 29, and 45. House Bill 981 will make a dramatic improvement in our ability to implement these plans and these strategies, and will be of great use to those both coastal and riverine communities throughout Virginia who are suffering now from existential recurrent flooding threats. You all know we have the highest rate of relative change on the east coast of the United States, and no coastal community or riverine community is going to avoid that challenge here in Hampton Roads. Not only do our localities have to deal with rising water, but they have to figure out how to pay for the costs of their future. This is in an area particularly in our coastal region, where our highest percentage of our GDP is being generated, particularly that caused by our federal presence. And it's also of interest to the Commonwealth from the perspective of its bond rating, something that we value above all things. And yet, we're finding that our localities, our cities, our municipalities are being asked to respond to the ratings agencies and describe how they are preparing themselves for this resilience in order to receive and retain their own credit scores. Ratings agencies have told us that unmitigated and unplanned for risks impact credit rating. This bill will help mitigate that challenge by helping localities within the Commonwealth help themselves and giving them the option of grant and loan to be able to do that. We as a Commonwealth have a responsibility to prepare, to aggressively manage this risk. House Bill 981 will help us do that for our coastal communities. We urge your support. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, you were much too modest when you introduced yourself, Admiral. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Good evening. Nate Benferrato at the Southern Environmental Law Center. We support this bill. We are particularly pleased to see 50% of the revenues directed towards energy efficiency programs and all of that money going to low-income energy efficiency. We think that's a great use of funds. It will help these families and communities reduce their energy burdens, and it also benefits all customers by making fossil fuel power plants run less, put less pollution into the air, and help bring all of our costs down. So we support this bill, and we certainly thank everyone who's worked on it.
Thank you, sir. So the suggestion has gone off. So quickly, if you could tell us who you are, who you represent, and I assume you support the bill. Briefly, why?
Yes, sir. Harrison Wallace with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network Action Fund, and we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Danielle Sims with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. We support House Bill 981 because the majority, around 60% of the money, will go to low-income programs.
Mr. Chairman, Anna Kilias with the James River Association. We also support the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Christy Smith, Virginia Conservation Network. We also support the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Kendall Crawford, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. We support this bill because we have a sacred duty to care for creation as well as care for our neighbors.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is William Stiles. I'm Executive Director of Wetlands Watch, a statewide nonprofit working on these issues for about 12 years, and we strongly support this bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Peter Anderson with Appalachian Voices. We thank the patron, thank everybody for their work on this bill. We support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to testify against the bill?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, David Ogburn representing LS Power. I want to be clear up front that LS Power supports the bill and supports RGGI. It thinks that the bill needs to be made fairer to all providers, and I'll explain that to you. First, I'm going to tell you just a tiny bit about LS Power. I'm not going to trespass upon your time. LS Power owns EVgo, the Commonwealth.
Sir, could you get, we're having trouble with the mic, so we want to make sure we hear you.
Okay. Do I need to start over?
Much better, much better.
Okay.
Why don't you start about 30 seconds ago?
Okay. So I represent LS Power. My name is David Ogburn. LS Power supports RGGI adoption. It's supported in Virginia, supported in other states. We just simply believe that the adoption needs to treat all providers fairly. LS Power owns EVgo, the Commonwealth's vendor for the statewide electric vehicle chargers. It also owns the Doswell Energy Center. There are 2 gas-fired baseload units there and 3 gas-fired peaker units. LS recently invested $100 million to add those last 2 peaker units. It also owns clean energy and storage assets, including a 25% interest in the Bath pump storage facility that you're probably familiar with. LS Power has several long-term contracts that do not permit the pass-through of the RGGI, the cost of RGGI allowances through to those customers. So that is the crux of the issue here. Those contracts were entered into in 2017 and earlier. Contracts entered into in 2018 and later do provide for the pass-through of those costs. The cost to LS Power of buying allowances to cover those contracts is estimated at approximately $15 million per year for 21 and 22, and $5 million a year for 23 through 25. To put that in perspective, Reggie allowance revenue over that same period of time to the Commonwealth should be over $500 million. LS, we've been working with the patron. We appreciate her working with us. We've obviously not been able to reach agreement, or I wouldn't be standing here. We've given the patron and the governor's office several different options of different ways to fix this. We're actually not looking to be made fully whole. We're looking to be made partially whole. And one of the key things that we offered is to any credit that we get that we're not paying for, we're willing to invest that amount of money in Virginia through buying goods and services in Virginia. None of those options are reflected in the bill before you. New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Connecticut have all put allowances aside at a discounted rate for long-term contracts, and we're simply asking that Virginia do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ogburn. It was perfect. Delegate Ware?
David?
Yes, sir.
Did you say you did not oppose the bill?
We do not oppose the adoption of Reggie or anything else in the bill. We just don't, the bill doesn't provide for the fair treatment of different providers.
Right. And the reason I asked the question is you've taken the entire time for the opponents, and I didn't hear you say you opposed the bill.
Well, so I don't exactly support the bill in its current form. I actually did think about, Mr. Chair, Delegate Ware, I actually did think about that before I came up, and I thought there might be fewer opponents than there were proponents, so that was why I made the decision I made.
Smart guy. Smart guy. Thank you, Mr. Ogburn. There's one other individual testifying.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Vassey, CEO of Virginia Manufacturers Association. We're in a similar posture. We're not really here today on opposition, but we do have a concern about one provision in the bill. We do appreciate the patrons' interest in the distribution of the proceeds, but we do fundamentally disagree that these are tax revenues. This has been billed as a utility auction, and we believe under the SEC, those funds should be redistributed back to the ratepayers through a fuel adjustment. We know that that's been a consideration for the past couple of years. We've not had any opportunity to debate it, so we did want to at least put it before you that that is something that would be very important, and those ratepayers could choose to use those proceeds to do everything from improve the energy efficiency of their homes or improve the energy efficiency of their factories or pay people. But those proceeds are the ratepayers. So we'd ask that you consider that as this bill moves through the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Delegate Herring, you have the last word.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, so I'm sure that many of you are aware that there are people who do want amendments to the bill. And I just want the committee to know I've made a commitment to be open and listen. And I've met with some of the stakeholders yesterday. But I prefer that the bill come out in the form that it's in. It's likely going to go into a conference. I understand the Senate companion. It looks different. And then what I don't like is to rush on things. And I think that will give us an opportunity in conference to fully look at everything and hopefully come out with something that, will make people feel a little bit more comfortable.
Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, I guess, it's kind of a comment and then a lead in to something else that may end up being a motion. So I think that obviously we can all agree this is a big change in public policy. I mean, if we go down this path, I mean, this is a very definitive, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it type situation. And the point that I know there have been at least 2 or 3 different companies who've come by and talked about pre-existing contracts that they have. I do think that is something that we, should this go forward, does need to be taken into account. Having a pre-existing long-term contract is one of those things that, when the field shifts underneath your feet, is tough to try to do business. And so, that being said, I know that Mr. Ogburn represented LS Power. There were some draft amendments that I had submitted. Now may be the time to at least tentatively discuss those, just to kind of get them out there so that we can see what it is we're dealing with at this juncture. Because I think that issue is a big deal. And who knows what we will see come over from the Senate, but, you know, we all know that sometimes that our friends in the Senate may not be our friends. And that's, you know, we can't always rely on them to try to fix stuff in conference committee. And I appreciate your commitment. I'm not questioning your commitment to that in the least, but things do get jumbled in conference. And so I do think it's at least worth a discussion at this point.
Is that a request that the amendments be circulated, Delegate?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Counsel? So Delegate Quinn, what's your pleasure? I'm perhaps you might spend a moment telling Leader Herring sort of the gist of the amendments. I'm sure she'd be glad to take them with her. You can explain them to the committee.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. And as they are tentatively drafted, they are, particularly one is lengthy. And so, you know, I think defining the pre-existing contractual arrangement is important. And I can try to get these into an actual draftable format. And I don't know if potentially we want to, I know we don't like to hear bills in sub and then rehear them in full, but if we can get this amendment into a posture that we could potentially do that, then I'd be perfectly happy to let it go for the moment and get them into a better format so we can take a look at them in full.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Kilgore.
what I think I heard the patron say that she's willing to work with individuals to address their concerns between now and the full committee and now on the floor, you know, just continue to work on this project. And I think if I get that assurance, I'm fine with just moving forward. I'm not saying I'm supporting the bill, but I'm saying I'm fine with moving forward and not addressing these concerns and just move on. If that's fine.
Delegate Quinn, is that acceptable to you? I got it, I guess. Any other members of the committee before we take that motion? Motion is properly seconded. I am told that this, should it report out, has to go to Appropriations Committee, so the proper motion is moved to report and refer. With the sub, excuse me, with the substitute,
Yeah.
that's right.
Mr. Chair, I'd ask Delegate Ayala if she would mind withdrawing the motion so we can have a motion again. Yeah, just so. Yeah, and withdraw the second. Mr. Chair, I would move on behalf of Delegate Ayala that we report and refer with a substitute to Appropriations.
Motion's properly made and seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members vote on the electronic voting board. Please close the roll. Motion to report and refer with a substitute passes 6-4. Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Staying on the same subject, he was here early. Delegate Poindexter, another Reggie bill, 1628.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. In accordance with your request, I will be brief. I'm not going into Reggie much. Most of you know much about it. Signed in 2005, effective 2009. It's a cap and trade scheme to reduce CO2 emissions. 9 Northeast states, and if New Jersey is joining again, that'll be 10. There's a lot of information around on it. I will use the Congressional Research Services report briefly. In the last 10 years, about $5 billion roughly raised in auction proceeds and about $5 billion spent on efficiency, renewables, climate initiatives, consumer assistance. Then the report gets telling in that assessing RGGI impacts presents challenges in terms of emission reductions, health benefits. It does occasionally, it appears to move generation out of the state, and it has an impact on high electricity demand manufacturers and industry. The report also concludes contributions to directly reduce accumulating greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are arguably negligible. The other conclusion is experiences from RGGI would be instructive for future efforts to set up a cap and trade proposal at the state or federal level. So I'm not here to argue all the studies or anything else. I'm simply here to argue that House Bill 1628 says that the elected representatives, that's all of us and down the hall from the House and the Senate, should have a say and a vote on the regulations to implement such a scheme, simply because electricity is such an overriding requirement of our economy, our lifestyle, and our standard of living. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Poindexter. Any questions from the members for Delegate Poindexter?
I would move the report. Second.
Substitute motion.
Second.
Delegate Bagby?
I know.
Delegate Bagby, what's your motion?
I thought we were going to wait until we heard from the audience, but since we're accelerating this, I move to place the bill. Move the PBI.
Motion is to pass by indefinitely. That is actually debatable. Anyone want to say anything about that? All right, it's properly moved. Motion is probably made and seconded. Please open the roll. Members, record your votes. Ooh. Please close the roll. Bill's passed by a vote of 6-4. Delegate Poindexter, you also had 1629.
Yes, 1629, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Transportation Climate Initiative, TCI, is similar to RGGI, but related to the transportation arena and sector of our economy and standard of living and just the way our whole country works. It's not as far along. I understand there are 12 states in it and then probably D.C. The Commonwealth has signaled its intent to join it. It's a cap and invest, cap and trade, cap and tax, whatever term you want to use. The program and the project is really to put a carbon tax on gas and diesel fuel used in transportation and drive the cost of it down to where less fuel is used each year or every other segment whenever they decrease the allowance, and to use the revenue for related transportation projects. Very similar, identical concept to RGGI. Intended to drive the direct, it's basically a clear carbon tax. I would say to you, though, that the benefits are going to a narrow set of beneficiaries that are not using our transportation system, especially the highways. If you're not using fossil fuel, you're not going to get the benefits. It's going to be electric cars and other vehicles, mass transit, bike lanes, low-income subsidies, whatever. Understand that. But here's what's shocking. Some of the preliminary indications are 17, 19, 20, 21 cents a gallon increase. And that would be on top of the 12% proposed in the governor's budget. And so that's one heck of an increase. Now, that also results, since it's going to drive the number of gallons down, that means we're going to get a lot less money for highway construction and transportation fund in general. Those of us in rural areas have to drive a lot further. And obviously would affect the poor people, lower income people more than that. So there's a lot of we have a lot of fuel dealers and a lot of people work in that industry. It's a whole new thing. You're going to take that whole segment out by the time this program ends. There's a huge economic outfit. So I wasn't going to make the same argument to the committee. Emissions are already going away or going down due to other programs that are going. The other question would be, how is it going to play with House Bill 1414, the large transportation flowing through? So I make the same argument to the committee and to the General Assembly. The people's representatives should have a vote on something that's going to have such an impact on everything we do and the well-being and the safety of our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Poindexter. Any questions for the patron from the panel? I see we have someone who wants to testify. Does anyone who wants to testify in favor of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the subcommittee. I am Steve Hayner. I am here on behalf of the Thomas Jefferson Institute for Public Policy, and we've taken a lot of interest in the proposed Transportation Climate Initiative. This should be a fairly easy yes vote because I think it's pretty obvious that the ideas behind this, the outline of the MOU that was released late last year, it involves a tax, it involves a rationing scheme, it involves quite a bit of change in an entire industry. Thousands and thousands of jobs. I don't think it can be done by regulation. I think it would have to be done by legislation. So I'm not quite sure why it's hard to vote for this. But that's our major purpose, is to make sure that as Virginia goes through this process in the next few months and before any decision is made, that as much attention is paid to exactly what this is doing. RGGI is a train that sort of left the station. I didn't get up on that other bill. We had some concerns. I would have gotten up last year. But it's done. But compared to RGGI, this is far more money and far more disruption to the economy.
Anyone else interested in testifying against, or excuse me, in favor of the bill?
Good evening. I'm Mike O'Connor with Virginia's Petroleum and Convenience Marketers. Not necessarily testifying in opposition, but just making one point on that. The TCI proposal nationally has three components. The first one is rationing, motor fuel and diesel. The second one is taxation on what's remaining. There'll be either a 4 or 8% mandated decline for each year. So I think the concern is what's going to happen to that 12 cents in the Transportation Trust Fund in the future. The third provision it has is for prohibition. In either 20 or 40 years, we'll be down to 20% of what we sell today. $857 million in the Transportation Trust Fund this year. What's that going to be in 10 or 20 years? The last, and the reason I'm testifying in opposition to this bill, we've had some assurances from the administration that when this comes up next year, it will be before this body and the other body down the hall. And we think that's important because I'm looking at a letter from September 12, 2018, and that says, Virginia is fully committed to TCI's founding principles and shared values. And that's signed by Secretary Strickler, Secretary Valentine, and Secretary Ball. So I think that shows us why this is certainly necessary to be reviewed here again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, Brett Vassey, CEO, Virginia Manufacturers Association. We do thank the patron. We support the bill. There's been a lot of ongoing discussion about the appropriateness of citizen boards, as Delegate Keem is a major proponent of, and the legislature. We think that this is going to be a prelude to a battle, and if the legislature takes ownership of this issue, we think it's a better representation of a better outcome. The other thing I'll remind this body, from an industrial point of view, our transportation network is the lifeblood of our factories. And last year, because of a veto session bill that was passed, we now have the 5th highest diesel and road tax combined in the nation. You pancake this on top of it, we will be at a serious disadvantage against our competitors. So we think the legislature should own this, not a small citizen board.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in the audience wish to testify in favor or against the bill?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources for Governor Northam. The governor opposes this legislation. The Transportation and Climate Initiative is a conversation It's not a regulation. It's not something that's binding on the Commonwealth. It's something that is being considered among the states that are RGGI partners to deal with what is our biggest source of carbon pollution in Virginia. The transportation sector, 46% of our carbon pollution comes from transportation. I think it would be a dereliction of duty for us to not be involved in these conversations. Certainly anything that would raise the gas tax, or I'm not sure where the idea of rationing comes from. I think that's pretty hyperbolic language. But any significant policy decision like that would obviously have to come through the General Assembly. But this bill would hinder our ability to be at the table. And as you all know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we need to be able to participate in these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Sir, we got a couple minutes left.
Nate Benferrato, Southern Environmental Law Center. We support these conversations and for that reason oppose this piece of legislation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Shippey, Sierra Club, we oppose this bill as well.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, CCAN Action Fund, we oppose the bill as well. Transportations are the #1 carbon emitter in Virginia, so this is a conversation to allow us to take action on those and also start to look at new modes of transportation like public transit, which will really make our entire transportation system a lot more equitable. So we would love to be a part of this conversation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Danielle Simmons with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. We also oppose the bill.
Evening, Walton Shepard with the Natural Resource Defense Council. The patron is correct that TCI is much like the RGGI program. And just as RGGI has made the electric system in those states cleaner and cheaper, that's why it's a popular program, long running. Pennsylvania is about to join, even though they're one of the largest carbon emitters in the country. So too is TCI designed to make our transportation system also cleaner and cheaper. So for that reason, we would oppose the bill as well. Thank you.
Delegate Poindexter, you have the last word.
It's too large to go down the road without the initial participation by the General Assembly.
Thank you, Delegate. Anything further from the panel?
Substitute motion.
What's your substitute motion?
PBI, Mr. Chairman. Motion to pass by indefinitely.
Motion to pass by indefinitely has been made and seconded. That's a debatable motion. Anybody on the panel want to debate, or Delegate Poindexter? Anything to add?
I've made my case.
Clerk will please open the roll. Members will vote on the electronic voting machine. Please close the roll. The motion passes 6-4. Thank you, Delegate Poindexter.
Thank you for hearing me.
Excuse me. Next up is Delegate Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's amazing what deadlines can do. I believe we have peace in the valley between all parties under this with suggested line amendments, which are being distributed now.
So take a motion on these amendments.
Mr. Chair, move the line amendments.
Amendments have been moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? The amendment is before us. Why don't you explain what's going on with this amendment, Delegate Mullen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the genesis of this bill was that we have what's called a Skiffs Creek transmission line, which was a very large electrical transmission line that was within the viewshed of Jamestown. It was highly controversial, remains highly controversial, and subject to litigation. The origin of this bill is to prevent a situation like what had occurred at Jamestown from occurring again. We've worked very hard with Preservation Virginia. We've worked very hard with the Department of Historic Resources as well as Dominion to be able to find a middle ground to prevent unnecessary damage to historical resources while also still being able to preserve the ability to be able to put transmission lines in a place that is the most effective use of the space. And so this line amendment is such that we would be able to, I guess, find peace in the valley. It gives to the State Corporation Commission the idea that it will be able to reasonably minimize the adverse impacts of scenic assets, historic districts like we have in downtown Williamsburg, and the environment in the area considered. That, Mr. Chairman, is the bill.
Thank you, Delegate. Any questions for the patron from the members of the committee? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to testify in favor of the bill?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Hunter Jamerson. I am the lobbyist for Preservation Virginia, the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, the Southern Environmental Law Center, and Piedmont Environmental Council. We are grateful to Delegate Munlin for bringing this bill. There have obviously been notable transmission lines in recent years that have had significant impacts on historic resources. Virginia should be very proud of its historic resources. We should be doing everything we can to protect them, and this bill helps. The line amendment before you, as Delegate Mullen mentioned, has been hurriedly discussed this evening, so I'll just walk you through the changes so you're aware of what we're doing with this amendment, and then I trust that Jack Rust will correct me if I misstate it. So there are three significant changes in the line amendment. The bill now will introduce the word avoid into the code and indicate that a utility in presenting its route must avoid or reasonably minimize adverse impact. Secondly, the line amendment will introduce a standard of to the greatest extent reasonably practicable. And then the third change, present code protects historic districts. This line amendment will protect historic resources recorded with the Department of Historic Resources. Those are both resources which are on the state's registry of historic resources, as well as resources which have been studied and acknowledged by the department as being eligible for recording on the registries. So with that, we think the line amendment helps. We ask you to report the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Keane.
So just to be on the right posture of this legislation, the first set of amendments that were circulated were two small line amendments. The second amendment that was circulated removes the line amendments that were proposed in the first and then replaces it, as the gentleman just mentioned. Problem was that we adopted the first two line amendments first before we saw the second, so we need to unadopt the line amendments that we did about 5 minutes ago.
Mr. Chairman,
we have
Delegate
to.
Keeman,
Yes.
I think you're exactly right. You'll need
so
to.
can I do my job? So so we need to make sure that we have a motion to unadopt or not adopt or reverse or strike the amendments, and then we would adopt the gentleman's amendment.
Is that a motion, Delegate Keane?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it is. Move to or strike the amendment that we just adopted. Second.
Motion is properly made and seconded. We are striking the first amendment that we discussed just a moment ago. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment is stricken.
And Mr. Chairman, now I would move the new line amendment, which is the one that the gentleman just wrote, which is page 1, line 57, and the whole paragraph that he read. Thank you.
Motion is properly made and seconded to accept, to adopt this new amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? That amendment is before us. Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Jamerson. You said, and I don't want to misquote you, but something to the effect of that these transmission lines have had a dramatic negative effect on historic resources. What exactly do you mean by that, and what are your examples?
My primary example, the most recent example, is the transmission line at Skiffs Creek, where at Jamestown we now have a significant megawatt transmission line crossing the James River in what was otherwise a protected viewshed with, frankly, one of Virginia's single most valuable historic resources, Jamestown. That's an example of where these standards would have been helpful in the Corporation Commission assessing that route and its impacts more stringently.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate O'Quinn.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. I thought you meant that someone had actually been injured or harmed by this.
Anyone else to testify in favor of the bill?
Mr.
Delegate Lopez. Hold on just a second, Delegate
Yes, sir.
Rest.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw. Actually, I don't withdraw. Mr. Chairman.
It's going to be a long night, Delegate Lopez.
I understand that, but when Delegate O'Quinn said that, sort of snarkily, that no one was injured or harmed by this, we've had, if something like this had been in the code a while ago, we wouldn't have had people bulldozing Civil War battlefields. We wouldn't have had people, at least taking into account some of the historic preservation efforts we have neglected. We are amazing in our historic preservation in Virginia, but we could be doing considerably more than we've done in the past. And so, just from an economic development benefit perspective, the amount of people coming and visiting our battlefields, visiting our parks, visiting our historic resources is extraordinary. It's a huge boon for the Commonwealth. And so the idea that no one was harmed, well, history is harmed to a certain extent. So I hope that he would understand that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's finish hearing from our witnesses. Delegate Rust?
Mr. Chairman, John Rush, I'm here on behalf of Dominion. I just want to thank Delegate Mullen for working with us to try to find a reasonable solution to this. Mr. Jamerson, on behalf of the Historic Preservation Group, we think this is a reasonable solution, and we appreciate your time.
Anyone here to testify? Someone get a picture of that. Anyone here to testify against this bill? Delegate Kilgore. Move to report with amendment is properly made and seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will please vote on the electronic voting board.
Thank you.
Please close the roll. Delegate Mullen, the bill reports with an amendment 10-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good luck this evening.
Thank you. Delegate Mugler. This is HB 234.
HB 234, yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I present an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Delegate. Council will distribute it. Why don't you start describing it as the members are getting it in front of them?
HB 234 would create a division of offshore wind. The purpose of the division of offshore wind is to further the Commonwealth's objective in deploying offshore wind in Virginia in the most efficient way possible that maximizes long-term and sustainable economic value for the Commonwealth. If created, Virginia will be one of the first states in the country to create a division solely focused on the issue of offshore wind. Our opportunity here is that by 2030, the offshore wind industry is expected to create over 36,000 jobs and deploy nearly $100 billion in capital. Virginia is well positioned to capture a portion of these benefits if appropriate focus is committed by the Commonwealth. The Central Coordinating Office for various state-level agencies, local and regional public organizations, higher education, and the private sector interests, including groups like the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the Virginia Economic Development, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, Hampton Roads Localities, Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, Go Virginia, Reinvent Hampton Roads, Old Dominion University, Virginia Maritime Association, and the Virginia Port Authority. This would initiate necessary planning and analysis to position Virginia to maximize the benefit from the deployment of offshore for the Commonwealth. Studies would include workforce assessment and need, additional potential lease areas, stakeholder engagement, reduction in regulatory barriers, economic opportunities for Virginia-based businesses. It would provide dedicated staffing to the Virginia Offshore Wind Development Authority, allows the office to utilize the industry expertise sitting on the authority to inform and enhance the activities of the office. It would provide annual updates on progress and report on investment, and the reports would be submitted to the General Assembly and the executive branch.
Thank you, Delegate Mugler. Any questions for the patron from the members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Hold on, I think Delegate Marshall was first.
Yes, a question. I know that other parts of the states have also, in the state of Virginia, are looking at wind. So did you look at making this a little bit broader instead of just offshore wind? Because I know that some of the areas along the Blue Ridge Parkway have talked about this also. Instead of having an offshore wind and a, Highlands wind, did you look at maybe combining two? Because the same principles, I think, would work either way.
Well, they could potentially work either way. This was directed specifically towards offshore wind.
Delegate King?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions to the patron, if I can.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the fiscal impact statement, it talks about how whatever costs there may be associated with creating this office that you're creating would be absorbed in House Bill 30, which is the governor's budget, which will fund the establishment of the Office of Offshore Wind within the Department of MME. Your bill would create a division of offshore wind. Are we talking about the same office?
Yes, sir.
Further question, Mr. Chair. Is there a reason why one refers to an office, this one refers to a division?
The bill was rewritten, and so when we submitted to budget, it was submitted as an office.
Okay. So the only reason I ask is I want to make sure that there's no fiscal impact that we have to worry about separately. So
That's
when we,
correct, sir.
So when we pass this bill, it can go straight to if we pass the bill, it can go straight to the floor, and the folks upstairs will understand that the office and the division are the same entity that we're trying to fund. So we just want to make sure we line up to the same item. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the patron from the members of the committee? Anyone in the audience here to testify in support of the bill? And we are on a clock.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Hayes Fromme. I'm with Ørsted. We are the largest offshore wind developer in the world. We are doing a demonstration project in conjunction with Dominion here in Virginia, and we just signed a lease with the Port of Virginia to lease some land at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. We think that this is a good idea. We support the bill, and we thank the leadership of the delegate for putting this forward. The value of this we've seen in other states. Having the state focus their efforts on trying to drive the industry itself within its jurisdiction is important. Virginia will be one of the first states, if this is created, to have a focused office specifically for offshore wind. And given the magnitude of the opportunity from an economic development standpoint, we see the value in having it focused primarily on offshore wind. There is certainly a lot of value to focus on onshore wind and solar. I would argue that within the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, there are program managers that focus on that as well. And so this creates another way in which the state can focus its efforts on driving and maximizing economic development for the Commonwealth through offshore wind. So thank you. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Trieste Lockwood. I'm with the Governor's Office, and we support the bill. Focusing on our offshore wind resource is a priority for this administration. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bruce Burkett with the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. We have membership consisting of utility-scale wind and solar, and that includes offshore wind members, developers, and we support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Murray with Dominion. We very much support the bill. When I was a young child, my father worked at Newport News Shipbuilding on building the USS Nimitz. We view offshore wind as the biggest opportunity for Eastern Virginia since the nuclear aircraft carrier. I'll have more to say when Mr. Hayes' bill comes up, but we very much support this legislation.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Ryan O'Toole representing Avangard Renewables. I'm the developer of the Kitty Hawk offshore wind lease area, 36 miles southeast of Virginia Beach. We thank Delegate Mugler for her work on this legislation, very much support the bill, and think it'll continue making Virginia a leader in offshore wind. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ross Scrogg on behalf of the Virginia Maritime Association, very much support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Danielle Sims with the Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and we also support the bill.
Thank you. Anyone here to testify against the bill?
Mr. Chair, I'd move to report.
There's a motion to report properly seconded. With a substitute. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will please vote on the electronic voting machine. Clerk will please close the roll. Delegate Mugler, 234 reports with a substitute. I think it said 9-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Delegate Tran. This is HB 1225.
HB 1225. I have a substitute, Mr. Chair.
Of course you do.
Of course. Perfection
Save the
takes
trees.
a while to cook in the kitchen, or almost.
While council is distributing the substitute, could you please tell us what it does? And first I'll entertain a motion. Properly moved and seconded. All in favor of accepting the substitute, say aye. Any opposed? Substitute's properly before us. Delegate Tran.
Thank you. What this bill does is address situations, what this bill does is it explicitly identifies situations where electric utility companies no longer have to give a 10-day written notice before they shut off power to a residence, and also establishes consumer protections for when there is suspected meter tampering or stealing power from the company. This situation arose when a constituent of mine, I put this in last year, so in the summer of 18, experienced a unilateral power shutoff from her utility company, and through the process of working with the SEC, realized that there were parts of the terms and conditions with the utility company that did not match up with what's in the code, because currently the code does not provide any exceptions for shutting off power without giving 10 days notice unless, and so we started looking into that and wanted to also make sure that we were providing guidelines for when there are these kind of gray areas outside of, emergencies and acts of God, but the gray areas of being unsure if there was a tampering situation. How do we balance both standard procedures that utility companies already have to address those situations with some consumer protections?
Thank you, Delegate Tran. Any questions for the patron from members of the committee? Is there anyone in the audience wishing to testify in favor of the bill?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Carmen Bingham with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and we appreciate Delegate Tran bringing this measure back up before you all this year. We think that this is a good measure to help with some consumer protection and just give some transparency to the process for utility consumers. So we appreciate the measure.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. Catherine Bond with Dominion Energy, and with gratitude to the patron for her work, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew V. Horn with the Electric Co-ops. So we've been working with Delegate Tran on this. It may not be perfect right now, but I think we're looking forward to continue to work with her throughout the process.
Anyone interested in testifying against the bill? Delegate, is there a question of the Delegate Marshall? Did you have a question? I heard a motion to report. Properly moved and seconded to report 1225 with a substitute. Clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting machine. Clerk will please close the roll.
Thank you.
Delegate Tran, 1225 passes with a substitute 9-1.
Thank you.
Did you want to vote yes? You got it? Delegate Hayes. This is 1664.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have in front of you amendments as well as the fact that bill that Delegate Lindsay had to be incorporated. with
So-
House Bill 1664.
Yes, we previously incorporated 1607 into 1664.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
The amendment is being, the amendment's being distributed. It's actually a substitute. I need a motion. Moved with a substitute. All in favor? Moved with a second, excuse me. All in favor? Any opposed? Substitutes before us. Delegate Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As we've heard just a little bit earlier with the bill that Delegate Mugler had, there's an enormous energy and interest around the space of offshore wind energy for the Commonwealth. Many of the stakeholders have gathered and come together around this issue, and I'm happy to present House Bill 1664. There are a few items of points of interest that we ought to remember when it comes to this bill. One, that we're working on behalf of the public interest, generating up to 5,200 megawatts of offshore wind by 2034. Two, because we understand that the cost for this energy is not inexpensive, there's a low-income exemption. Three, we're working hard on the economic development and workforce development requirements. Four, there's language here for competitive procurement with priority hiring for local workers. And of course, there is environmental mitigation. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Virginia is well positioned to become the nation's leader in offshore wind, and we have already made tremendous strides in this area with the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project coming online this year as the first fully permitted offshore wind project in U.S. federal waters. There's currently no U.S.-based offshore wind industry to support the emerging offshore wind market. Nearly all of the construction, manufacturing, and related activities occur in Europe, with the parts being shipped across the ocean to support the American wind projects that already exist. The opportunity for growth in this industry is immense, and with the right state and federal policies, the U.S. stands to could install up to 22,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030 and 86,000 megawatts by 2050. States are competing right now to attract business up and down the offshore wind supply chain, and Virginia is in a great place to attract the bulk of those jobs and investment, especially in Hampton Roads across the Commonwealth. With nearby eastern seaboard states like New Jersey and New York setting aggressive goals of 7,500 megawatts and 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind, respectively, Virginia must take a bold action to show that we're serious about this industry. A recent study from the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, the Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance, and the Reinvent Hampton Roads organization has shown that we could attract potentially as many as 37,000 jobs to support projects up and down the East Coast. This could be transformational for Hampton Roads and the Commonwealth. The opportunity is ours if we choose now to pass state policies that seize Virginia's and Hampton Roads moment. This bill would set a target for Virginia to generate, as I said earlier, 5,200 megawatts of wind energy, offshore wind energy. Just closing, Mr. Chairman, it's my hope that it's the will of this body to report the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Hayes. Any questions for Delegate Hayes from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience want to testify in favor of HB 1664?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Murray from Dominion. We're very much in favor of the substitute. We appreciate the delegate and Delegate Lindsay both bringing this measure to the House. There has been a lot of good work to achieve consensus on this bill. There's still some work to do between the full committee. I'll echo some of the discussion from the first matter you took up tonight. There is some further work that's particularly true. There's been good agreement among industry stakeholders. There's still some work to do with our environmental partners, and there's still some work to do with our governmental regulators. I'll mention a couple specific areas, and some of the younger folks working on the bill will fill in anywhere that I forget to mention that is still an area to work on. First, as was stated by the patron, this is not the lowest cost resource. Going into this, it's kind of like when you all adopt policies on underground transmission lines. You're recognizing at the onset you're not choosing the lowest cost resource. When you have done that in the past, you have typically put a cost metric of some type. As a placeholder, the substitute before you refers to twice the cost of a combustion turbine, that's a gas peaking unit. That may not be the exact right metric. It may not be expressed in the right way. We'll continue to work with governmental stakeholders to find the right metric. It's there at this point to show you there's going to be some type of cost metric. We're also very mindful of the costs. I think the Commission will give you some testimony on the costs. I will mention there's some very significant benefits. There's the economic development benefits that the patron mentioned. There's also fuel cost savings. This unit has no fuel costs, so ordinarily plants and around-the-clock plants have fuel costs. Those are significant and very material, to say nothing of the environmental benefits. In terms of other areas to work on in the bill, there is a placeholder for low income. That's hard to define in a way where we're not having to redetermine eligibility. So that's something, again, we'll work with our governmental partners to further refine. There is some placeholder language about marine life. We'll work with some of our environmental partners to further refine that. In particular, the right whale is the marine resource that folks are concerned with there. There's also probably, given the enthusiasm of the group and the press of time, one or two internal inconsistencies in the bill that need to be resolved, typos and things of that nature. The bill does represent a lot of work. There's work to do before the full committee, and we know we've got to get it done before you meet on Tuesday. With that, we would respectfully ask you to recommend the bill to the full committee.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. We're running short on time. This is still just a suggestion, so Mr. Frammy, if you could talk quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hayes Fromme with Orsted. I'll echo the comments of Mr. Murray with Dominion and just reiterate that while the language is still a work in process, the idea here is to create the guardrails necessary both to ensure that projects are as cost effective as possible, as well as making sure that the Commonwealth is extracting as much economic value out of these projects as it can. The idea of the Commonwealth having the quality infrastructure necessary to attract the industry is one thing. Aligning it with a policy to drive for a large-scale deployment of offshore wind is an important complement to that. So we hope you support and report the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'll be brief again. I'm Ryan O'Toole representing Avangrid Renewables. As I mentioned briefly earlier, they're the developer of the Kitty Hawk offshore wind project, which, when fully built out, will be about 2,600 megawatts, or the energy equivalent to power about 700,000 Virginia homes. We're excited about the legislation and thank Delegate Hayes and Delegate Lindsay for their work on this. And we're excited to keep working with stakeholders and the Commonwealth on this issue. Thank you for your support.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, sorry about that. My name is Bruce Burkett. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition, and we support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Miles Laurie on behalf of Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, we are very supportive of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Trias Lockwood. I'm with the Governor's Office. I would also like to thank Delegate Lindsay and Delegate Hayes for their work and the stakeholders. We agree that there is work to be done on this, but we're encouraged by the progress that we're making, and we'd like to see it move on. Thank you.
Delegate Hayes, last word. Here we go. Hold on. Speaking in?
Neither.
Neither.
Yes. Hi.
This is the middle category. I forgot to ask for the middle category.
You didn't give the opposition, but I'm neither on that. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Kim Pate. I'm with the State Corporation Commission. And while the commission does not have a position on the bill, I do have a handout that I can share with you that identifies the cost to Dominion's customers, which would result if Dominion were to build 2,600 megawatts of offshore wind.
If you'd like to distribute that to the committee members, that'd be terrific. While it's being distributed, do you want to finish your comments, ma'am?
Certainly. I was just going to walk through it. I'm sorry. I apologize about that. Yes, sir. And what you'll see on the sheet is that what we have done is we have calculated what the impact on a typical residential bill would be, and this would be in 2027 if Dominion were to construct 2,600 megawatts of offshore wind. So that first line item identifies that the impact on the monthly bill that would go through the rider that would be charged to customers is $13 per month, which would result in an annual charge or yearly charge to customers of $156. I have a couple bullet points underneath that just kind of identify some information about it. The $13 a month increase is based on Dominion's $7.8 billion construction estimate. And we have worked with Dominion today to make sure that the estimates that we have used are the correct numbers. And that amount, the $13 per month, would be paid by customers whether or not the offshore wind ever generates any electricity. So just wanted to be clear about that too. Now, as Mr. Murray said a few minutes ago, there would be some fuel cost savings that would result. We don't have those quantified, but that is something that would reduce the impact to customers. However, in the last two bullet points, you'll see too that there are some other costs that would possibly be in place also. As far as the integrated resource plan shows that that Dominion plans to build or acquire gas peaking units to meet customer demand when offshore wind is not available. Again, that would have an increased cost to customers. Also, in case the units did not run as anticipated for any reason, the cost of replacement power would also increase the bill. So we're starting at $13 per month. There may be some savings, but there may be some additional costs.
Thank you. So there were no questioners in the queue until you got up. Delegate Kilgore.
Well, I like questions, so that's good.
Under the number 2 of the bill, it seems to exempt low income individuals or homeowners.
Correct.
Does that so this $13 a month would not apply to them?
It would not apply to them. It would be the average customer bill. So some people are not going to pay the cost. Some people are going to pay more. So on average, it will cost $13 per month. But as it stands, you're correct. Low income would not pay it.
Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I'll hold off till we speak about the bill.
Delegate Marshall.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The $13 a month, how many months, how many years would that go on?
Okay, that would be the initial bill impact once all of the 3 phases of the offshore wind are put into place. So that's why it would start in 2027. Now, what happens is the actual cost decreases over the life of the unit as the costs are recovered from customers. So that's the initial bill cost, and it would decline over the life of the unit.
And follow-up question?
Delegate Marshall.
How long is the life of the unit?
We assume 25 years, and we confirmed that with Dominion today, too. They use that assumption also.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the panel of this witness? Anyone else here to testify?
Thank you.
What was it? Neutral about the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Meade Browder. I'm with the Attorney General's Office and the Division of Consumer Counsel. We represent the ratepayers' interests before State Corporation Commission and before the General Assembly. I'm standing up in I guess you'd say the opposed line right now based on the language in the current bill. I know Mr. Murray said that it's somewhat of a work in progress. I'll try to be brief in highlighting what the concerns are. I first want to emphasize, though, that the Attorney General recognizes the benefits of large-scale offshore wind generation, that there's benefits that could be brought to the Commonwealth as a carbon-free power generation resource advancing the clean energy goals of the Commonwealth. Also the economic development benefits for certain segments of the economy. But as I said, we do have a statutory duty to represent ratepayers, so I want to speak to that. That's, of course, both residential and business customers. And want you to be informed of the economic implications for ratepayers. Really, I want to make 2 points. One was just the cost. Ms. Pate discussed that in terms of the monthly bill for a residential customer, so I won't elaborate on that. I would just note in terms of sort of a reference point, for 2,600 megawatts, the figure is $8 billion is the current projected figure, and that is equal to the current rate base value of all of the company's generation right now that it owns right now. So just in terms of scale, it's equal to the book value of all the generation in the company right now. The other thing I want to make point on this cost is that offshore wind currently is 2 to 3 times more expensive than other zero carbon renewable resources. So I'm talking about solar and onshore wind. So even holding aside gas and other things, for renewable energy, offshore wind is much more expensive. And then really to hone in on the key point, where our key concern is that current language in the bill deems upfront, the legislature is deeming, all costs to be reasonably and prudently incurred and requires the SCC to approve cost recovery from customers. Normally, utility commissions, regulators make factual findings and hold proceedings, and they make the reasonable and prudent determination. And that's the kind of the ratepayer protection before utility commissions. This bill does away with that protection for what would be a first of its kind project in North America. The concerns not only would be if it gets built and if it's on time and on budget, and Dominion has a great track record of building generation on time and on budget, certainly acknowledge that. But if it runs into problems, if there are cost overruns, if you get part of the way there and for whatever reasons, supply chain issues, whatever, it can't be completed. The way the bill is written right now is ratepayers are on the hook for all costs that are spent, even if it never generates a single kilowatt hour of electricity. And the analogy or example I'd point to is there was a similar situation in South Carolina just recently where the legislature, in essence, deemed reasonable and prudent, they didn't use quite those words, but in essence, did that for a nuclear unit. And it ran the cost overruns, it ended up being scrapped. There was a big political firestorm, and the ratepayers were on the hook for that. So that's really where we're coming from, is the concern of the sharing the risk. And right now, all the risk in the bill, right now, all the risks are on the ratepayers up front. And we'd just like to see, as the bill continues to be worked on, hopefully it will be, that there can be some measures put in to spread that risk. And maybe just final point would be, if it does go forward, I would note that there's another bill out there, Delegate Jones, Delegate Ware, 1132, that would go a long ways towards maybe helping kind of reset the company's rates that maybe we'd be able to better absorb what we're looking at here. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Delegate Keem, is your question for the witness? Or?
Yes, let me ask the counsel from the Attorney General's office on this. I'm reading this, I'm sure most of us are reading this for the first time. The first section, letter A, defines that this is a Commonwealth policy to have offshore wind as a clean energy source. And starting with line 17 on down, it refers to phase 2 utility. There's nothing that requires, mandates that Dominion be the only provider, does it?
That Dominion be the only provider?
Yeah.
Or only
Yes, sir. In other words, the way the language is we're saying that it's the policy of Virginia to have offshore wind, and then we go right into Dominion phase 2 utility as if they would be the only one doing this. Is this a sole source contract for them, or is this just the language that says, as an example, Dominion could do this?
Right.
I just want to clarify that.
Right, and I'm seeing the substitute for the first time here, and the print's not real good, but what I see is on line 17, a phase 2 utility, that's Dominion.
That's right.
And I believe everything that follows from that, including the language at 21 through 23, is up to 3,000 megawatts, the costs are deemed reasonable and prudent. I believe all that is in reference to the Dominion doing it. And I believe it's their intent to be the one to at least do 2,600 megawatts. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
So, Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up, I just want to make this clear. And again, I don't have a dog in the fight. I just want to make sure we know what we're voting on. Because right now, the this bill is designed to create an opportunity for the Commonwealth to enter the offshore wind business to allow Virginia to be a leader in offshore wind. A little while ago, we created an office or division of offshore wind. We're investing our time and resources, and we're talking about the cost and benefits to ratepayers. But the underlying, I don't want to say the elephant in the room, but the underlying question is, does this require and only allow for Dominion to be the provider, or is this a generic enough language with reference to Dominion for the first part? Because the reason why this is an important question is what the SEC provided as an example of what a ratepayer is going to be. That's based on Dominion's cost. If a new entry were to be made by a new company from anywhere from overseas or from the United States, we'd have to do a whole new analysis, wouldn't we not?
I believe so. If a third-party developer, not a franchise monopoly utility, backed up by the ratepayers, if a third-party developer did this and entered into, say, a purchase power agreement with Dominion, then the risk I was talking about, that would not be under, and that's how I believe most of the projects up to the north are handled that way. All the risk would not be on the electric utility company and ultimately the ratepayers. If it didn't perform, then presumably the terms of the purchase power agreement, the end consumer would not be having to pay. But I'll just answer your question this way. This bill, and why I'm speaking, is this bill allows Dominion to come forward with the project, and it would be deemed reasonable and prudent before they even walk into the State Corporation Commission.
Mr. Chairman, just
hold on.
So,
Delegate Keane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to conclude this train of thought, and thank you for your time, and I know others may have views on this, I'm going to put a no vote on this, not because I don't care about offshore wind, I do. Not because I don't want to see a project move forward, I absolutely do. Only because the language that's written in front of us is unclear whether we are putting in the code one company to have sole contract on a massive project that'll put Virginia on the map on wind, or if it's just an option for other companies to be able to come in. And since that's not clear, until we have that answer, I'm just want to let you know that I'm not going to be able to support this at this stage. Thank you.
Delegate Lopez.
Mr. Chairman, just piggybacking on what Delegate Keane just mentioned, if you go to line 50 and 51, it says any project pursuant to subsection A shall be subject to competitive procurement or solicitation for the majority of the services and equipment associated with the facility's construction. So it would be a competitively bid program. But the problem I have is that the SEC's document that they gave us is based on Dominion's costs, not on what would be the competitively bid costs. And so, come on. I find some of these figures suspect, but it is going to be, according to this amendment, this amendment nature substitute, it would be competitively procured through a solicitation for the majority of these services and equipment.
Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In discussion of and I see the SEC is ready to respond maybe to Mr. Delegate Lopez's assertions, but I would say the relevant lines on Delegate Keane's questions, and Mr. Browder can probably confirm this, are lines 22 to 24. They are the cost, well, actually starting on 21, the costs of any such facilities are deemed to be reasonably and prudently incurred, and notwithstanding any other provision of this title. Mr. Browder, what would you say that means?
Mr. Chairman, that's the crux of why I'm here. Yes, what that means is that. I think it says all cost, I believe.
The costs.
It means that the commission has to. It means that whatever it ends up costing, the legislature has declared that those costs are reasonable and prudent, which that means those costs are charged to ratepayers.
Thank you.
To boil it down, that's what it means. Is that if they were not deemed reasonable and prudent, then there could be some of this risk of cost could be on the utility or state or whomever. If it's deemed reasonable and prudent, it's on the ratepayers.
Thank you, sir.
Delegate Ware, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The SEC may be prepared to make clear their where these findings come from? Is that?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Could
Fully
you?
aware. Yes, sir. Dominion has provided an estimate. I think it's been made public, and also we've looked at their estimates. They've looked at what they expect the cost to be. They've talked to their partners. They have not put out an RFP for the bid, but based on their preliminary estimates, that's where the $7.8 billion comes from. And concerning whether this is for Dominion specific only, the answer would be yes. This legislation is under Title 56 and would only apply to a rate adjustment clause that would be applicable to two companies, Appalachian Power Company and Dominion. By specifically saying Phase 2, it would only apply to Dominion. So that is why we calculated only the cost for Dominion's customers. Now, like Mr. Browder just said, if the cost estimates turned out to be different, or the RFP turned out to be different in cost, let's say it was $10 billion or it was $5 billion, then obviously the cost would be different. But this is based on Dominion's preliminary estimates, and they have done some research concerning the cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe there are some other people in line to testify.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in that middle category as well. Our organization is an all of the above energy organization, as long as it's reliable, affordable, and available. But we do want to associate our concerns with the Attorney General's office. On lines 21 through 24, I'll be really much more blunt. It's a blank check. And that's not something I've ever seen in my time up here, us writing something that broad. I think there is an interest in talking to some of the proponents and correcting that, but that is a really, really big concern, taking away that SCC constraint. The other item, just for your, we only have two other points that have not already been made. On line 13, as far as the interconnection on federal waters, just to be clear, this could be in Maryland based upon this direction. We don't know where facilities, plural, would be, but that's something to take a look at. The next item is on lines 30 through 32. We have provided a privilege to industrials since 2007, since we re-regulated electric utilities, that we could shop. By this language, those that are out and have already gone to market competitively, or those that do go to market, all these costs will be borne by them as well as non-bypassable charges. That is a serious problem because we've already made an agreement on how we're going to allow certain opportunities for market, and we'd be bringing those costs back and putting those back on those companies. And then the final item is O&M costs. We haven't talked about that in here, but we've tried to do a little initial research, and you can talk about construction cost as the SEC has, but you also should consider in this discussion the ongoing operation and maintenance costs, which are rather large for facilities like this just because of the harsh conditions and their impacts on rates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the members.
Delegate Lopez.
Could Mr. Vassy come up again? Mr. Vassy, do you think we should also take into account the attendant benefits of offshore wind to the tune of 2,600 megawatts? To the Commonwealth and to our communities in terms of cleaner air, fewer carbon emissions, fewer greenhouse gas emissions? Do you think that has any equal weight or attendant weight, or are we only talking about the bottom line?
I think that our point of view is that the State Corporation Commission is the best place to balance those points of view. They have all the tools in place as far as the forecast to use for what is the benefit cost. We don't think that this is the venue to do that. We think that the SCC is the venue to do that.
And follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Lopez.
Considering the fact that of the four rules, the major rule is always the impact on the ratepayer, do you think? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll talk offline.
A couple more witnesses. I'd ask you please be brief. I'm looking over your shoulder at this clock that's staring me in the face.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter Anderson with Appalachian Voices. I apologize, seeing the substitute language the first time as you are just this evening. Just to echo the comments of the Office of the Attorney General and the previous speaker, we view the State Corporation Commission as the expert. and we view bills that remove the expert commission's authority to determine what costs are reasonable and what costs are prudent. We view bills like that to not be in the public interest. So while we appreciate what the patron's trying to do here with ramping up investments in clean energy resources, we agree with that. We want to ramp up investments in clean energy resources, but not at any cost. And so we do not believe that the Commission's authority should be usurped, or we do not believe that this body should give its blessing to any as yet undetermined costs of a proposed project.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Will Reisinger. I'm an energy attorney, and I'm here representing Calpine Energy Solutions. Calpine is a competitive service provider licensed to sell energy in Virginia, and I certainly understand the policy goal here to add offshore wind capacity and don't take issue with that at all. I do want to draw the committee's attention to some new language on lines 31 and 32, and Mr. Vassie referred to this non-bypassable charge language as well. I think this language might have some unintended consequences because it, at least in my reading, would require customers who have chosen to go and access the competitive market for renewable energy, who might be purchasing 100% renewable energy already, it would require them to pay an additional generation cost for this resource, and it could discourage other customers from accessing the competitive market for energy. And I think that's important because this market is working well. It's allowing customers in Virginia and renewable energy buyers to meet corporate sustainability goals and in many cases save money. So I did want to flag that new language for the committee tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Reisinger.
Thank you.
Delegate Hayes, last word. Somebody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just simply say to you, I certainly hope that it's the wishes of this committee to act favorably when we're considering the enormous opportunity that we have here in the Commonwealth, as well as for the U.S. when it comes to offshore wind energy. And as you've heard, there are many concerns as we stand here now, but we're also heard that the many stakeholders, including the administration as well, plan to get together, sharpen the pencils, and come before the full committee and to hammer out all of these particular issues that we've heard about on tonight. So again, Mr. Chairman, I hope it's the wishes of this committee to act favorably on the legislation. Thank you.
Motion to report. Second. And proper second. Clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting system. Close the roll, please. Bill reports with a substitute 5-4. All right, hold on. All right. Can we clear the roll? Let's clear the roll. Let's clear the roll.
Everybody just decide.
Come on. All right.
I don't want to be the one that kills it, so I'm going to vote. As I said,
All right.
I'm going to vote no.
All right. Please, can we clear the roll, please?
I'll just wait till everybody decides. Seems like nobody else has decided.
All right. There's a proper motion to report with a substitute and a second. Please open the roll.
Vote your punches. Everybody vote your punches.
Members will please vote now, carefully, on the electronic voting system.
Now I'm going to have to say that.
All right. Please close the roll. Bill reports with the substitutes 5-4 with one abstention.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we have our work to do. Thank you.
I believe that concludes all of the non-committee members. Am I wrong? Is there a member of the General Assembly out there? Okay, so we have several of our own members presenting tonight. Why don't we start with Delegate O'Quinn with HB 1656? Yeah. You want to go out there? Sure. While Delegate O'Quinn is heading out there, a couple of administrative matters. If I could get members to pay attention here for a second. I've been asked by Delegate Jones to take HB 1133 by for the day. Oh, you want, I'll tell you what, strike that. We've already got this up on the board. We've been asked by Delegate Lindsay to have his bill incorporated into HB 981, which we heard earlier today. Second. Properly moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Without objection, HB 20 is incorporated into HB 981. Now, Delegate Lindsay has asked that we take by for the day HB 1133. There's a motion? Properly seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Without objection, 1133 by for the day. Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have House Bill 1656.
Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1656 is actually some clarification from House Bill 2789 that I carried last year, which was one of the consensus pieces of legislation that came from the Rubin Group. And that bill sought to create incentive programs enabling energy conservation measures and installation of solar equipment for low-income individuals, elderly individuals, and individuals with disabilities. That group actually took another look at the language and have suggested some minor tweaks to make sure that the programs that are authorized under that original bill are more workable to implement. The two main things is clarifying that the incentive programs can be used for heating or cooling, and then expanding the program to include facilities where the target audiences may reside that provide residential services, assisted living homes, for instance. So again, this is sort of a clarifying measure from that consensus bill from last year. Nothing in the bill alters the original intent.
Any questions for Delegate O'Quinn from the members of the committee? Hearing none, any members of the audience here to testify in favor of HB 1656?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Carmen Bingham again with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. And we appreciate Delegate O'Quinn bringing this clarification back up to you. This is imperative for us to be able to get these programs designed and implemented for the low-income customers in Dominion's territory. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Catherine Bond with Dominion Energy, and with gratitude to the patron, we support the bill.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Sam Brumberg with Virginia's Electric Cooperatives. We support the bill.
Anyone in the audience here to testify against the bill? It's been properly moved and seconded to report HB 1656. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will vote on the electronic voting system. Delegate O'Quinn's 1656 reports by a vote of 10-0. Delegate Lopez, HB 1183. No, you're going. You're gonna present it and then we'll take it back. Oh, you do? Okay, good.
Oh, can I get one? Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment, or a couple amendments. Maybe it's a substitute being handed around right now.
Council, amendment or substitute?
I think it's a substitute.
All right, while it's being circulated, why don't you explain it to us, Delegate Lopez?
I will. And actually, I'd like to make one additional amendment to this as well. I'd like to include rural cooperatives after where do we go? Municipalities.
Hold on just a second, Delegate Lopez. So the committee has a substitute.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify. So what we have right now is a section 1. Are we replacing the entire bill and replacing with a Section 1, or is this in addition to?
We're replacing the entire bill. The original bill was a Section 1 as well.
Oh, is it? All right, so, Mr. Chair, I would take that to be an amendment in the nature of a substitute, and if so, I would move the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Wait, properly moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Substitute is now before us. Delegate, you had
An additional amendment on the, after the word municipalities, you could add
It's a pretty small. Tell us where municipalities is.
fifth line, end of the fifth line.
I see.
There it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Add rural cooperatives.
Mr. Chair, I would move that on the fifth line, after the words municipalities, we add the words rural cooperatives, was it?
Rural electric cooperatives.
Rural electric cooperatives. That's my amendment, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second? Properly moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Without objection, the amendment is now before us. So we now have a full substitute bill before us. Delegate Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As quickly as you can, right?
What was that?
As quickly as you can.
Quickly as I can. So energy storage is a pretty critical component of the sustainable energy future. In order for Virginia to achieve the governor's executive order of 100% carbon-free energy by 2050, energy storage will be a necessary component to facilitate grid stability and allow more wind and solar to power the Commonwealth. However, Virginia is behind when it comes to storage. Storage is still an emerging technology, and the Commonwealth can help advance the deployment of storage by establishing a deliberate plan to support energy storage. The first step is by directing the State Corporation Commission to create a task force to provide expert guidance and identify smart incentives. The task force comprised representatives from various organizations, including the administration, DMME, the SEC, Office of the Attorney General, as the Ratepayers Council, utilities, rural electric cooperatives, municipalities should be a part of this process. And as a part of the process, the task force would assess the potential costs and benefits of all types of long-duration bulk energy storage resources. In addition, the task force will assess how utilities, competitive service providers, energy customers, and other third parties can deploy energy storage both in front and behind the meter. Basically, adoption of energy storage technologies will enable cost savings for both customers and providers, improve system reliability and resilience, and introduce diversity of supply, and reduce environmental impacts. Outside of existing pumped hydro projects and several energy storage pilots, Virginia currently does not have a significant share of the U.S. storage market. So I hope, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, that you will also agree with me that large-scale, long-duration energy storage is a fundamental component of a carbon-free future. And I hope that you, and I ask that you support the creation of this energy storage task force.
Thank you, Delegate Lopez. Any questions for Delegate Lopez from members of the committee? Is there anyone here to testify in favor of HB 1183? Okay, a lot of bodies, so we're going to move quickly. It is getting late, so the 3-minute clock has morphed from a suggestion to a rule.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I will be very brief. Jake Oster from AWS. I want to thank the patron for bringing this bill forward. We agree energy storage is important to integrating renewables into Virginia's electricity system. We think it's important for customers for being able to manage costs, be able to help integrate renewables into the system, and we are supportive of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Virginia's electric cooperatives support this bill.
Catherine Bond, Dominion Energy, and we support the bill as well.
Thank you. Anyone here to speak against the bill?
That's just a crazy environment.
No further questions from the members of the panel. There's nothing on my board. Delegate Lopez, you get the last word.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I hope that you will support this creation of this task force, and thank you.
Been a motion to report, properly seconded. The clerk will please open the roll. Motion is to report with a substitute. Members will please report their votes on the electronic voting system.
I saw that.
Clerk will please close the roll. HB 1183 reports with a substitute 10-0. Delegate Bagby. Delegate Bagby, members of the committee, while Delegate Bagby is getting to the podium, I had initially thought the Delegate Bagby wanted to present and then pass by for the day. He tells me he'd rather have our vote this evening. So we need to get the bill back before us. I need a motion to undo the prior buy for the day.
Mr. Chairman, I would so move.
Properly moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Without objection, this bill is now back before us on our docket this evening. Delegate Bagby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 1483 creates a new program for low-income families at or just above the poverty line to provide a sustainable solution for challenges for individuals and families that have challenges paying their electric bill. Eligible families must participate and implement energy efficiency measures and participate in education programs on energy usage that can affect their energy bills. PIP, the percentage of income payment program, would be administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development. There will be a couple of individuals that come to speak in support, but none to speak in opposition.
That's an order.
All right, any questions
But prior
from
to that, I will move the substitute.
Mr. Chair, I'd move the substitute.
Motion properly made and seconded to adopt the substitute. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the substitute is before the committee. Any questions for Delegate Bagby from the members of the committee? Probably want to see the substitute first. While we're doing that, Ms. Bingham. The clock is running, Ms. Bingham.
Yes, sir. I'll be quick. I do have a handout for the. So again, Mr. Chairman, members of the
All right,
committee.
let's give Ms. Bingham our attention, please.
Oh, you're fine.
No,
Carmen
we need to
Bingham
pay
again
attention.
with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, and our appreciation to Delegate Bagby for bringing this before you. Virginia Poverty Law Center advocates on behalf of low-income constituents throughout Virginia. We work to break down systemic barriers that keep people in poverty. The Virginia Percentage of Income Payment Plan, known as PIP, designed to provide a sustainable program for Virginian families living in poverty to afford their electric utility bills. While we do not define low income in this program, we predicate eligibility on whether or not a person or person's household qualify for any one of the available public benefits programs that have income eligibility criteria that is as close to 150% of federal poverty level. And the handout I just provided you on the last page is the 2020 federal poverty level guidelines that have been put out there. And as you will see, if you look at those guidelines, you all as legislators pretty much fit, if you have a family of 3 or 4 in your delegate salary, as living right at poverty or between 100% and 150% of poverty. So I just want you to keep in mind that those are the families that we are talking about. So if y'all don't have a second job, you are poverty level. Just letting you know that. So the 2 core principles of PIP, this is very simple. First is to ensure that the energy burden of low-income households in Virginia is affordable, and the energy burden, as Delegate Bagby said, is the percentage of income that you spend on your utility bills. We specifically look at the electricity burden, and the payment for electricity service should be no more than 6% of your income. 10% of your home is heated with by electricity. And we need to ensure that energy is not wasted. Therefore, we require participants to actually participate in energy efficiency programs designed to reduce their energy usage. Okay. There's a lot of design in this program. We modeled it after the Ohio PIP program, which has been in place since 1999 and has been through a couple of let's just say reboots and improvements. And so we've learned from their best practices there in order to design this program in such a way that it is sustainable and affordable. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Bingham. Ms. Bond?
Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, Catherine Bond, Dominion Energy supports the legislation and has firsthand experience with the PIP program in Ohio. And while there is a lot to work out in terms of the program itself, it can absolutely provide the savings and relief Ms. Bingham described.
Anyone here to testify, despite the delegate's assurance that there wouldn't be anyone? Is there anyone here to testify against the bill?
Mr. Chair, I would move to report.
Motion to report properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will please vote on the electronic voting system. Clerk will please close the roll. Bill reports with a substitute 8-0. Delegate Heretic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have
Let's start with 656.
And I have substitutes, of course, in both 656 and 657, so if you want to hand them both out and save you some steps.
All right, let's please send them both out. Why don't we start, though, with 656, if you could start describing it for us, Delegate Heretic.
Of course, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Move the substitute.
All right.
Move to accept the substitute.
This is,
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. There's a motion properly seconded to accept the substitute. All in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none. Substitutes before us.
Mr. Chairman, basically, 656.
We'll be at ease for just a second here.
Okay.
I just added $15 to Dominion's bill tonight. You did? Yep. You did. Right.
Jay went home, so he doesn't, I guess, want to talk tonight about 11:30.
I think he didn't want to split the talk. So I'm cool with that. Let's hold one.
You're going to do 110.
110. Literally.
That's fine. Go take your time, whatever it takes.
Well, don't say
Yeah, I take that back. I would
Take out. Almighty, don't say that. Don't say that.
You might not have a quorum.
Yes, for
Are we ready, Delegate Heretic?
Mr. Chairman, apparently, this council doesn't have 656 to hand, so if you want to just pass this by for a moment.
Is
Mr. Chair, I would-
657 ready to talk about?
657, I think.
Let's do
is ready.
657. Council, we'll move ahead.
All right.
Let's go. There's a substitute there. Can I have a
Substitute there.
motion on the substitute?
Move the substitute 657.
Is there a second?
Second.
People getting tired here. Motion properly seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Substitutes before us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As indicated, this is almost land use planning. In preparing to develop solar projects throughout the Commonwealth, we have to, from time to time,
Excuse me, Delegate Heretic, there's a microphone.
Yes.
Get closer to you're too tall. Get closer to the microphone.
Raise
Please.
it up.
Thank you. There you go.
Yeah,
There we go. Mr. Chairman, in connection with the development of solar projects throughout the Commonwealth, we have to develop local land use planning standards to incorporate comprehensive plans. All 657 does is to include language in the new sub H of that of the statute, which incorporates other land use planning standards under section 15.2 of the Virginia Code for localities to consider in evaluating whether to allow solar development in their areas. And this specifically would allow localities to permit up to 150 megawatts or less of solar facilities to be located in their localities without conditional use permits, and waives the requirement that solar facilities be reviewed for substantial accordance in conformance with a comprehensive plan. All this does is allow localities to proceed a little bit more expeditiously without planning reviews to allow solar development. All this does. And
Any
frankly,
questions for Delegate Heretic from the members of the panel?
Sure, Mr. Chair, just a quick question.
Delegate Keane?
On line 77, when it says, as one of the conditions, the new Roman
Yes.
Roman 4 waives the requirement, who would waive the requirement? Is it the solar facility or is it the board?
It would be the local the locality which adopts the standard.
So you'd want the locality to waive the authority?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I would note that 655 in the series got assigned to CC&T. I mean, this is really land use planning.
We don't get to make those decisions. Any other questions for Delegate Heretic on 657? Anyone here to testify in favor of 657? Briefly, Mr. Dix?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Chip Dix on behalf of the Solar Industry Association and also Open Road Renewables. And what this bill does is to say that if you have a comprehensive plan, which is a planning document and very general, and then you have a specific zoning ordinance that says you can have solar as a permitted use with a conditional use permit, that there's no need to go through a comprehensive plan review. And the last line 77 Delegate Keem asked about is actually language that VACO provided, although VACO still does not support the bill. They wanted to be able to allow the locality to waive the requirement to go through this substantial and accord determination under the comprehensive plan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dix.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Virginia's electric cooperatives support this bill.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Patrick Cushing, representing Cypress Creek Renewables. We're one of the top leading renewable solar facilities in the country, and we support the bill.
Thank you. Anybody here to testify against 657?
Mr. Chairman, Joe Lurch with Virginia Association of Counties. Mr. Dix is right. We did request that language starting on line 78. We sent that back to him for his consideration, and then what Mr. Dix added was the line starting on 76, ruminant 3. And essentially what that says is anything 150 megawatts or less, even if it's not a by right development, in other words, it's a special use permit. And to be clear here, 150 megawatts or less is more than 2 square miles in area. Then a locality could not do a substantial accord review. Why is that important? I can give you one really good example. In Charlotte County, they recently adopted a 150 megawatt facility that they found to be in accord with their comprehensive plan. They did the substantial accord review. In talking to the county administrator, he said there was another project that wanted to go in near State Park. That was not in accord with the comprehensive plan review. There's a reason we do the comp plan reviews for substantial accord, especially for something that's the size of 2 square miles, larger than many of our small towns. So that's our objection to the bill. If you take that out, I think we're going to be fine with the bill. But thank you.
Anyone else testifying against the bill?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. Susan Seward. I'm actually chairman of the Sussex County Board of Supervisors. We have both large and small projects in our county, either currently generating juice or soon to break ground. We actually have language in our comp plan that does address solar. We are a very forestry-intensive county, and we have language that says solar facilities should be located outside forested areas to preserve our forest resources. So when we're looking at projects coming into the county, our comp plan, in fact, gives those folks direction. And quite frankly, if it's going to require several thousand acres of trees being removed, we have a planning staff of 2 people. So why waste our staff's time if our comp plan language is going to kick out the project? That's quite frankly why we did it, because the forest resources are critical to our community. Again, we're not saying no. We have projects on the ground and projects coming, but we feel like we should have this ability to, manage the influx of projects. Thank you.
Delegate Kilgore.
I just want to ask this question. I'm not and never have been on county, cities, and towns. On line 78, it says, not yet, substantial accord. Is that a term of art, substantial accord?
Mr. Chairman, I'd say to Delegate Kilgore, it is. Everybody calls this a substantial and accord determination, and it is designed to deal with large public facilities, when you look at the first page, that need to be designated on the comprehensive plan so that people will know that those public facilities are there. It's roads, sewage treatment plants, that kind of thing. And one of the things that it does also do is to say that a public utility is designed to, if you're going to put a substation or something there, then that should be considered for substantial accord determination. This is, I just responded, Delegate Heretic asked me to respond, that what we're doing here is to say that there's 2 types of review. One is if you've got a general comprehensive plan and there's no reference to solar in there, and you permit in your zoning ordinance, comprehensive plans are implemented by zoning ordinances. If the zoning ordinance says you can specifically have a solar project on agricultural property with a conditional use, the locality has the ability to deal with all the use issues and be able to deny the conditional use permit if they choose not to approve the project.
Any other questions for the patron?
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Delegate Keem.
And speaking to the motion after I made the motion. The motion is to report with the substitute. And speaking to the motion, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Keem.
If there's a second. I want to emphasize that I I support the idea of having more and streamlined ways to make sure we have more solar everywhere in Virginia. That's the whole spirit of tonight's conversations. I do also want to respect and very much pay attention to the concerns raised by VACO and VML and other towns and counties. And the language as it's been drafted, and I'll point out that it wasn't by our council, a wonderful council here, the language is a little bit vague because it doesn't tell you who waives this, and also that sentence doesn't read quite the way I think some of us were talking about. So with the understanding that if the patron can work with councils and others to make sure that the language reads exactly the way you want, the way VACO and VMO is comfortable with, then I'd like to see the revised version at the full.
No problem at all.
Delegate Ware.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, like several here, I've not served on county cities and towns, although I did serve as as a county supervisor, and I wonder, on the motion, we sometimes refer to other committees. I like the idea of incentivizing more solar. I'm concerned that maybe at this hour, this night, we're not seeing everything we might from a local government perspective. I wonder if we could report and refer to CCT.
Mr. Chairman, if I could
In other words,
respond?
we would pass on our view of it, and then send to CCT on this zoning matter.
Thank you, Delegate Ware. Delegate Heretic, you wanted to have
Mr.
input
Chairman,
in that?
I think the gentleman's point is well taken. If this had come a week ago, I certainly would support referral, but I don't think I chair the Land Use Subcommittee on CC&D. It would come straight to me, and I don't think we have another meeting in which we can take up a referral at this point.
Mr. Chair, but just a question, speaking to the motion question. I know we never refer to the other body down the hall, but just wondering, do we know if there are other legislation that addresses this in this chamber somewhere, in the building somewhere?
Senator Marston may have.
Mr. Chairman, I'd say that Doug Hakeem, Senator Marston has companion bills on the Senate side that will be heard in Senate local government next week.
Mr. Chair, then
Delegate Keane?
Addressing, and I fully agree with my friend from Powhatan, but given the timing here, I wonder if we might be able to just pass this as is with some fixes for the full committee, with the understanding that should the other vehicle come from a gentleman whose name will not be mentioned here, then we will then try to address those concerns by referring it to CC&T, if that would work with the Speaker of the House.
Delegate Marshall?
Yeah, just FYI, CC&T meets Friday mornings, so we could refer this bill. I assume they'll have a meeting tomorrow, then they'll have one next Friday also.
Yeah.
Next Friday is too late. Delegate Bagby?
Mr. Chair, I think we have this thing all figured out. I think we have a road, and we just need to travel that road, send this bill up to full. It'll meet with and be placed in conference with the Senate bill, and we'll be just fine. So I will move the pending question.
There is a motion to report with a substitute properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will vote on the electronic scoring system.
Holla.
Would you vote me yes?
Hit.
Thank you.
Clerk will please close the roll. 657 reports with a substitute 10-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As has the council had the chance
All right.
to retrieve 656. Let me,
If you could, so there is a substitute?
yes, sir, and if I could simply describe it.
Please start describing. Why don't I take a motion first?
Move the substitute.
Yes. Moved and properly seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The substitute will eventually be before us. Why don't you start talking about it, Delegate Heretic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 15.2 includes, among other things, what zoning ordinances may in localities contain by permission of the locality. In other words, this is permissive, not mandatory. This 656 would add paragraph 13, which are provisions to incorporate generally accepted national environmental protection and product safety standards for solar panels and batteries. and identifying specifically the National Sanitation Foundation / American National Standards Institute, number 457, the International Electrotechnical Commission, number 61215-2, and Underwriters Laboratory 617.30-2, which basically create nationally recognized industry safety and product standards by which consumers can identify and purchase solar equipment which is known to be safe and reliable, and allows the localities to require that safety, those minimum safety standards for incorporation in their zoning ordinances.
Any questions from the members of the committee to Delegate Heretic? Any members of the audience here to testify in favor of 656?
Chairman, Chip Dix on behalf of First Solar and the Solar Industry Association, and we requested this bill. And effectively, most of us are familiar with Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental reports. And when you look in the substitute, which you don't have, but number 12 basically says that you take national standards for Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmentals, and that's what you follow. This provision basically says for solar panels, these references are not construction standards that would go in the building code. They're environmental and safety standards that describe exactly what the solar panels are supposed to do, that they don't break, that they don't leak, and at the end, the product cycle at the very end, that you basically decommission and make sure that there's no contamination to watersheds or anything else. So this is establishing within the permitted provisions in a zoning ordinance that these national standards, just like the Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental standards, that you would follow these environmental standards for and safety standards for these products, the solar panels and also the battery technology. And we've tried to work with VACO to work out some acceptable approach, and they're still they still have concerns about this particular language. Becky Campbell is here from First Solar, and she'd like to comment just briefly.
Key word there is briefly. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First Solar is the largest American solar panel manufacturer. We were founded in Ohio, and we really appreciate the delegates' support on this issue. It's been a challenging issue for us, and we think this will adequately address many of the concerns that have been raised by counties over the last year or two. So,
thank you, ma'am.
thank you.
Yes, sir. The clock is ticking.
This will be very short, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bruce Burkett with the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. We support the bill.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Shippey, Sierra Club, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Patrick Cushing representing Cypress Creek Renewables. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Miles Laurie on behalf of S Power, we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Sam Brumberg with Virginia's Electric Cooperatives, we support the bill.
Is there anyone in the audience here to testify against the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Joe Lurch, Virginia Association of Counties, and to express our concern with the bill, I'll try to make it brief. Generally, zoning ordinances, localities generally regulate and restrict or permit or prohibit the use of local buildings and structures. This section of code where you're putting in these standards are for use of a particular type of structure, which is solar panels and solar batteries. Now, this is relatively new in a lot of our counties, and so we have concerns about putting the state mandating that this be in local zoning ordinances. Now, we heard a testimony earlier about battery storage coming to Virginia, and we want to thank Delegate Lopez for including us as the stakeholders on that study with the SEC. I'll just note that last April, a 2-megawatt storage facility near Phoenix, Arizona, caught fire. There was an actual explosion. 4 first responders were sent to the hospital. What I can tell in reading some of this literature is that there was nothing in the way it was put in, the safety procedure, something just happened. It was new, and they're trying to get a handle of it. I'm just concerned for our members when we start talking about panels, but more so battery storage, that we're putting things in here that may hamstring them in addressing the issues and concerns that relates to land use. So with this, it's really a concern right now. It's not a full-throated opposition. It's really kind of in a strange section of code. So I just point out these concerns. And, I apologize to the patron. We've tried to express concerns along the way. We're not there yet. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else testifying against the bill? Any further questions for the patron from the committee members? Delegate Heretic, last word.
And, Mr. Chairman, basically, if counsel for VACO had read the first page of the bill, which has been in law for like years, it says a locality may include. It doesn't require them to do it. It simply sets the standards if they choose to do that. That's all it does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's been a motion to report properly seconded. The clerk will please open the roll. Members will please record their votes on the electronic voting system. Clerk will please close the roll. HB 656 reports 9-1 with a substitute.
Mr. Chairman?
Delegate Lopez.
At the request of the patron, I'd like to make a motion regarding HB 1483.
1483.
Right.
What's your motion?
Move to report and refer to. Having voted on the prevailing side, I would like to make a motion that we vote that we reconsider the vote and change it to being a.
All right. So let me just explain to everyone what's going on here. This is Delegate Bagby's bill. Your chairman is getting tired. We reported it out. We need to report it out and send it to appropriations. So what Delegate Lopez is doing is trying to get it back in the right posture. So I'll accept the motion to reconsider the vote by which we reported H. Bill 1483.
Second.
Properly made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The bill's back in front of us. I need a motion to report
I'd like to make a motion to report and refer to appropriations, Mr. Chairman.
Was there a substitute? So it's a motion to report the substitute and refer it to appropriations. It's properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will please vote on the electronic voting system. Please close the roll. It reports with a substitute and referred to appropriations 10-0. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to bring this in for a landing. We have just a few more bills. Next, I'd like to ask Delegate Ware, who's going to present HB 110 to us, although we will be taking the vote on it at a later time. We'll take that by for the day, but Delegate Ware wanted some time to talk to us about HB 110. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will not be a presentation. It will simply be an acknowledgement that other bills related to this, particularly Leader Herring's, connect with a bill that I have, HB 110. It does deal with long-term contracts, which has been alluded to earlier this evening. Those conversations are ongoing. I appreciate her willingness to talk, and I thank the chairman for this opportunity to simply mention that that's where we are at this stage.
Well, thank you, Delegate Ware, and appreciate your cooperation in getting the issue of the Reggie situation moving forward. We have already taken by 110 earlier in the evening. Delegate Keem, let's take 573 first. You have 72, 73, and 1677.
Mr. Chair, members, I understand what time it is, and I also understand that there are folks that drove a long way down here, so I'm going to make this really quick for the first two bills, House Bills 572 and 573, and then if I could take whatever time that I don't use for the first two and put that towards the last bill, I'd like to do that if that's okay. Mr. Chair, members, first of all, we don't have any substitutes to any of these three or amendments, so let me get right into it.
That's an applause line, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. House Bill 572 is a bill that many of you have seen if you've been in this building before. It's what folks have been calling the Solar Freedom Bill. The goal here is this. We all talk about how we all want to go from where we are as an economy using fossil fuel and carbon-emitting fuels into a place that's a cleaner place. And regardless of where we are politically or geographically, I think most people have a consensus that we should get there. The only question is how fast, what process do we take? and what vehicles do we use to get to that vision that most of us share. And I believe that a lot of the bills that we've had today, and you'll see next week, fall into three broad categories. There are bills that are very important for us to get to that goal. Then there are bills that are very, very urgent that we have to take action right now. And then once in a while, we have a bill that's important and urgent, that if we don't do it now, I think we lose an opportunity. I believe that House Bill 572 is in the category where it's both important and urgent, and here's why. You all heard about, and I'm sure many of you in your communities have heard that, power purchase agreements that we have right now in the books, 50 megawatts. As of January today, January 30th, we've already maxed out. We've had 50 more megawatts. Every single megawatt has been committed, which means that for the rest of this year, every business that's in your district and mine, and all the businesses that want to come to Virginia cannot even apply for power purchase agreements. And that's an urgency that we've never had before in the Commonwealth, with so much robust desire for solar. And the importance of this is that if we blow this cap that's there, an artificial cap, we can become the attraction for new businesses as well as Virginia businesses that are sending their employees outside. I've had conversations with folks that have businesses in Virginia that are rooftop installers that are sending their people outside of Virginia because there's no business to be had in Virginia. So this is about the most pro-business and urgent and important matter I can think of. But in addition to that particular provision, there are about 7 or 8 other provisions where we look at lifting some caps and such. Now, I will be the first to admit that the bill probably could use some tweaks here and there. My understanding is that a lot of our friends in the back here have been having lots of conversations about my bill and other bills and suggesting ways that we can try to improve this. And I would like to be part of that conversation at some point. And so before that happens, what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman and members, is to ask that you move this forward to the full committee. I understand there's some kind of a deadline by tomorrow by which some of our stakeholders are trying to come together with some language. Once they have it, I assume that I'll be able to see some of that language, and if so, on Tuesday I may be able to address that. But in the meantime, for now, I'd like to ask that this body take some action on this so that we can move an urgent and important matter forward.
Thank you, Delegate Keem. Any questions from the members of the committee for Delegate Keem? Hearing none, are there any members of the audience who wish to be heard really briefly on HB 572?
Mr. Chair, can I start with a couple of young people who drove down here from Northern Virginia to speak?
Absolutely. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, thank you. My name is Aditi Iyengar. I'm Noor Kabi. And we are high school students from Fairfax County. Right now, I'm not only a little bit tired, I am also scared and disappointed and angry because catastrophic climate change is threatening our futures, and it's caused by our reliance on fossil fuels. For years, my fellow students and I lobbied the school board to put solar on our schools. And finally, last year, we succeeded. But now, the contract has been stalled because of the cap on power purchase agreements. And again, we find ourselves waiting for adults and legislators to take common sense action on climate change. But there's no time left to wait. We need you to pass solar freedom so that school systems like ours across Virginia can proceed in securing a clean energy future. Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. Can I just ask all the other people in line, unless you have something specific to add that we haven't heard, please just give us the basics of who you are and whether you support the bill.
Chip Dix on behalf of the Solar Industry Association and Socorro Soda, we support the bill.
Bob Shippey, Sierra Club. The student said it best. Please report this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Ben Trainum on behalf of Secure Futures Solar. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Lazaro, Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. We support the bill.
Chairman, on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign, my name is Christiana Riederer. We support the bill.
Kendall Crawford, Director of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. We support the bill.
Peter Anderson, Appalachian Voices. We support the bill.
Catherine Bond with Dominion Energy, and thanks to the patron for allowing us a little more time to work this out. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Action Fund, and we support the bill.
Danielle Sims, Virginia League of Conservation Voters, and we support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Andrew V. Horn with the Electric Co-ops. We're in a unique posture on this bill because we passed a very similar piece of legislation last year for electric cooperatives. 12 of our rate-regulated co-ops in Virginia are already going through the rulemaking process at the Commission. They've notified their members. We don't have a PPA cap in cooperative service territory. We have a separate PPA structure that was passed by this General Assembly unanimously last year. We have a separate net metering structure, a separate net metering code section that's already been increased to a 5% cap. All of that's going through the rulemaking process. I think we would ask that you oppose the bill in its current status because it would disrupt everything that we did last year for electric co-ops.
Anyone else here to testify against the bill? Delegate Keem, you get the
Sure,
last
Mr.
word.
Chairman, just on the last point to my friend Andrew, our goal is to try to not go backwards. Our goal is to go forward. So if there's rulemakings that allow for co-ops to be able to have that, obviously we want to leave that, but the way the language might be, that's when I mentioned about the tweaks and such, because our goal here is to expand opportunities for solar, not to go backwards. So I'll commit to you that if we need to fix it, I'd be happy to do that.
All right, we have that on tape, Delegate Keem.
If I'd known that, I would have dressed better.
We operate on motion. Been a motion to report, properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members will vote on the electronic scoring machine. Please close the roll. 572 reports 8-2. Delegate Keem, 570.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. And 573 is a little bit similar, except it's a lot easier because this is a pilot program that already exists for solar. As we know, our utilities have the ability to provide some pilot programs. What we want to do is add as a category of those who may be eligible for these pilot programs, those that are in low-income communities, and it's defined in the bill itself. So we use a track language from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So this would add to an existing program where our utilities are already providing it, and we would create another category for those that are in the unique low-income category to be able to receive this. We just call this a community solar for low income, and that's really all the bill does.
Thank you, Delegate Keem. Any questions for Delegate Keem from the members of the committee? Anyone here to testify in favor of HB 573?
Carmen Bingham, Virginia Poverty Law Center. We support the bill.
Thank you for your brevity.
Christiana Reeder with the Virginia Poor Peoples. Again, we support the bill.
Trias Lockwood, Governor's Office. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Lee Williams, Green New Deal, Virginia. We support the bill.
Catherine Bond, Dominion Energy, and we support the bill.
And Harrison Wallace, CCAN Action Fund. We support the bill.
Anyone here to oppose the bill? Delegate Keem, last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just ask you to look favorably upon this bill.
It's been a motion to report, properly seconded. Clerk will please open the roll. Members, please vote on the electronic voting system. Delegate Keem, HB 573 passes or reports 10-0.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. And if I would ask my good friend from Powhatan, Delegate Ware, to join me up here if I can. And the reason is because Delegate Ware actually introduced legislation. Delegate Ware actually introduced legislation that's very, very similar to this earlier in the year, and we saw some things that we thought would be helpful with some updates. So he was very kind to allow me to introduce the same legislation with some updated language. So I ended up introducing it, and because he's such a gentleman, he let me be the lead patron, but he's my chief co-patron. This is a bill, Mr. Chairman and members, that we have not seen before in Virginia. And unlike some conversations that have been happening both among our friends in the back and in the public, this is not, I repeat, this is not deregulating anyone. This is also not going back in any way. As I said in my remarks, if we have urgent matters, important matters, and things that are urgent and important, this one falls in the category of important but not necessarily urgent, and here's why. We all know that we just talked about offshore wind, we talked about expanding more solar, we talked about providing for more parity for everybody who wants to have more cheaper renewable energy sources. What we didn't talk about is what would that future look like with our existing utilities. We have APCO, we have Dominion, we have co-ops, we have municipalities and others that are in the field now. We are still, unfortunately, operating in the same utility regulatory model that we've had for 100 years. And we haven't updated that because the technology has only caught up recently. So the way our government structures our regulation over these utilities, monopoly or utility regulation, is based on a model that is literally 2 centuries old. What we're proposing to you, Mr. Chairman and members, is a new concept that says, what if we came up with new rules of the road for the future of the clean economy, where we have energy providers as well as customers having more choices than before, and we have a lot more players and a lot more sources, and the cost goes down. In that world, does it still make sense to have utility regulation based on the old model that only a one company can handle everything from origin, extraction, transmission, distribution, and finally retail end? What if there's a way that we can talk about that whole chain in a way where monopolies that have a monopoly because that's the only company that can do that, they can maintain that, provide the guaranteed rate of return, but for everything else we can try to unbundle and open up the free market, we should do that. And that's the reason why, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Ware and I agree that this is a pro-consumer, pro-competition, and good government regulatory regime that we propose to you. And I know that the Delegate Ware has lots of good thoughts on this, and we also have a gentleman named Rob Gramlich, who is a consultant who's studied other states' models, and he's provided us with ideas from other states that have tried this to give us some best practices. And that's what our bill does. It's very long, but if you understand the big picture concept, we're trying to propose to you where we need to go in the future for Virginia to be a leader in clean energy economy. Mr. Chair, if I could, I'd like to defer the rest of my time to Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Delegate Keem. Chairman Sullivan, I am going to, in the interest of time, simply acknowledge my thoughts are very much along the same line as Delegate Keem's. This is one that I think people from across the spectrum ideologically can agree on, because it's one that has been done in places that reflect both the convictions each of us have, and would move us from an older setup to one that gives greater consumer choice and options. That said, I'm going to stop there and ask Mr. Gramlich to come up, give him a couple minutes or some time at least to make his.
Sure. Welcome,
Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And members of the subcommittee, I'll be very quick given the time. As Delegate Keem mentioned, other states have done this, and when retail competition has been done right, the prices have come down for consumers over that time period. They've fallen by 17% in those states with retail competition. They've risen in the states that have followed the traditional structure. And at the same time, in states like Texas, renewable energy has been growing dramatically, and we're also finding much more response on the demand side. 17% of the consumers are on some form of time of use arrangement, which is really critical for integrating a lot of renewables. So it's really the way to go for the future and the evolving grid. I worked for Pat Wood, who was the chairman of FERC, as well as the chairman of Texas. He set up that Texas market. There are a lot of good examples. I have looked at this bill, and I think this follows the best practices, including the Texas approach. And so I think it's a good example for this state to consider.
Delegates Keem and Ware, my sense of this bill is that it's a good conversation starter. Having said that, I'm not sure we want to start a big conversation at 10:55 on Thursday evening. Delegate Lopez?
I'd like to make a motion to carry this over on Rule 22 for next year.
Second.
I'm fine.
That is properly moved and seconded. Let me just finish by thanking the delegates for bringing this bill. As I said, I think it is an important conversation for this committee, this General Assembly to be having. I assume you're going to keep working on it. You're going to keep talking about it. And we'll be hearing these ideas again.
Mr. Chairman, speaking to that motion, which is properly before you, if I can.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your time, and I know obviously the time is late, and I understand the attention span may not be quite where we want to be. But this, as I said, this I put in the category of important policy matter. It may not be urgent, but it is something that we must deal with for us to unleash the innovation that's there. The only thing I'd request from anybody and everybody who's paying attention to this is that Delegate Ware and myself are just two of many, many people that want to engage in this conversation. And contrary to anybody's concerns, this is not a pro or anti anything. This is our best effort in trying to put together a thoughtful proposal for how we can go forward If we knew everything we know today and we started from scratch, what kind of regulatory regime would we have today? Would we have the one we have now, or we try to come up with something better? So I ask my friends, especially for those in the utilities, to come to us with some good faith efforts at what they believe is a workable model. And if so, I think we'll have a robust conversation next year.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us. There is a motion to carry this over under Rule 22 till next session. It's properly seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, with 3 minutes to spare, we are adjourned.